At 2:18 a.m., a patrol unit arrives at 47B Cedar Avenue. Inside, a woman lies by the doorway. No forced entry, no struggle, just the steady hum of a refrigerator and the faint click of a wall clock that has stopped at 2:14. The scene is quiet, unnaturally contained. A single overhead light flickers in the kitchen, casting short, repetitive shadows across the linoleum floor. Investigators later noted that the layout was symmetrical, almost clinical. Nothing overturned, nothing stolen. The body position suggested a brief confrontation, yet no defensive wounds were recorded. The contradiction between the stillness of the room and the abrupt cessation of life drew attention immediately. The first responders logged the call as a probable domestic incident. The victim's name, confirmed by identification found near the entryway, was Laura McKenna, age 33. Her phone was recovered from beneath a chair, screen cracked but active. No recent calls after 2:10. The last outgoing message, unsent, displayed a single initial, M. No recipient. No draft history. The timestamp aligned with the estimated time of death. The coroner's initial estimate placed the fatal injury between 2:12 and 2:15 a.m. At 3:04 a.m., homicide detectives from the Tacoma Police Department arrived. The senior investigator, Lieutenant Carl Moore, described the scene as too calm for the timeline. He noted that there was no sign of intrusion or forced access, meaning the victim likely knew the person who entered. A locked door, an unbroken window, and a body just inside. It suggested consent, not invasion. The first interviews began with neighbors. 2 residents reported hearing muffled voices around 2:00, but both admitted they assumed it was a television. One witness, a retired dock worker in apartment 4C, recalled hearing a short thud, followed by what he described as a police radio crackle. That statement was dismissed as confusion. None of the patrol units were yet on scene according to the call log. By sunrise, the area was sealed. Technicians worked in silence, cataloging fibers and surface prints. Only 3 distinct fingerprint sets were found inside the apartment. The victim's, her husband's, and one unidentified partial impression on the inner door frame. At that stage, the husband's involvement appeared most plausible. He was listed as Eric McKenna, 38 IT technician, currently staying overnight in Federal Way according to his statement. However, license plate recognition data placed his vehicle returning to Tacoma at 11:42 p.m. The gap between 11:42 and 2:10 remained unaccounted for. The investigative team followed standard domestic protocols, securing financial records, call logs, and messages. The first breakthrough appeared to confirm motive. 2 weeks prior, Laura had filed an online request for divorce counsel. Friends described growing arguments about money and infidelity. No official complaint had ever been filed, but private texts between Laura and a confidant used phrases like, "I'm scared of what happens when I say it's over." By the second day, the husband was located and brought in for questioning. His demeanor was reserved but consistent. He admitted the marriage had collapsed months ago, but denied contact with Laura on the night of her death. Investigators noted the precision of his answers, the absence of visible distress. When confronted with the license plate data, he suggested a GPS malfunction, a technical error he claimed to encounter before. His alibi placed him at a hotel in Federal Way from midnight onward, yet no staff recalled seeing him enter or leave. Meanwhile, the forensics lab processed the residual traces collected at the scene. Carpet fibers revealed traces of synthetic polymer, consistent with disposable gloves. Under UV inspection, faint smudge patterns near the entryway aligned with the curvature of fingertips. Covered, not bare. The residue contained particles of industrial detergent common to law enforcement supply kits. That detail was logged but not prioritized. considered cross-contamination from responders. Across the following week, additional leads emerged. A co-worker, Ralph Denton, who had recently been dismissed after workplace complaints. An unknown caller reaching Laura's phone multiple times that evening from a blocked number. And a missing 15 minutes between the last text sent and the first arrival log at the scene. Each piece formed a timeline too clean to be organic, as if curated. The first report, compiled by Lieutenant Moore, read as follows. Victim: Laura McKenna. Cause of death: blunt force trauma consistent with fall or push against fixed surface. Scene shows no evidence of burglary or forced access. Domestic motive probable. Primary person of interest: Eric McKenna, spouse. Investigation ongoing. Yet a single line in the report would later draw attention. The estimated arrival time of first response listed as 2:16 a.m. The dispatch log, preserved separately, indicated 2:18. 2 minutes may appear negligible, but forensic synchronization depends on precision. That margin would become the first of many anomalies. As the narrative solidified around a domestic dispute, the forensic pattern began to diverge from expectation. The bruising on the victim's wrists did not match the husband's hand span. The trajectory of the head wound suggested a left-handed assailant. The husband, Eric, was right-handed. These technical deviations were noted in sub-reports, but overshadowed by the established storyline. By the end of the second week, public interest had intensified. Media outlets circulated speculation about the jealous husband, and department spokespeople issued standard denials. The case appeared straightforward, too straightforward. In the background, the forensics database logged an internal access, 03:12 a.m., night of the crime. The user ID corresponded to an officer assigned to patrol shift in the same district. The entry was marked routine, auto-approved by system protocol. No one noticed the timestamp discrepancy then. A clock stopped at 2:14, a system accessed at 3:12, and a sequence of events that appeared seamless only because someone ensured it would be. The official investigation entered its procedural phase. Statements were transcribed, evidence bagged, and the timeline refined down to exact minutes. The working hypothesis remained consistent, a domestic altercation escalating beyond control. But the evidence, though aligned with that narrative, lacked texture. Everything felt unnaturally consistent. The sequence of data fit too perfectly, an arrangement that raised quiet doubts among the analysts. Lieutenant Moore ordered a recheck of the entry logs for the night of the incident. The dispatch records confirmed the first emergency call at 2:11 a.m., received from a mobile device traced to an anonymous male caller. The voice was calm, measured, reporting a possible disturbance, female unresponsive. No identification, no panic. The call disconnected after 12 seconds. The number was never used again. Audio specialists enhanced the background of the recording. In the faint static, there was a sound resembling an electronic click, the kind made by radio transmitters during channel switching. The relevance was uncertain, yet one forensic note in the margin read simply, "Possible responder? Check frequency overlap." That annotation remained buried in the report's appendix. 12 seconds of composure from an unknown man who vanished before the first officer arrived. The husband, meanwhile, continued to cooperate. His digital footprint revealed no activity between midnight and 4 a.m., except 2 attempted logins to his home security app, both unsuccessful due to network error. Investigators confirmed that the app server experienced an outage that night, likely linked to the area's short power failure. It explained nothing, but it closed another window. The forensic unit reconstructed the crime scene digitally. Blood pattern analysis indicated a single impact consistent with a fall against the corner of the hallway console. The injury pattern suggested force applied from a standing position. Deliberate, not accidental. Yet the angle implied proximity, not distance. Someone close enough to reach out and push. A crime of contact, not confrontation. As days progressed, media coverage diminished. The department, under pressure to finalize, pursued corroboration on Eric McKenna's potential motive. Financial records revealed declining joint savings, late mortgage payments, and a private loan in Laura's name unknown to her husband. The detail introduced new friction to the domestic motive. Potential blackmail, not jealousy. However, an unlogged envelope surfaced in the property inventory. A printed copy of an email draft, recovered from the victim's desktop cache. The header displayed only an initial, M. The draft read, "We can't keep doing this. It's not right, and it will end badly. Please, just stop before someone gets hurt." Investigators assumed M referred to a coworker or friend. The letter's tone was personal, not professional. The husband denied recognizing it. The name Ralph Denton resurfaced, her former supervisor, but his initials didn't fit. Still, his prior misconduct justified renewed scrutiny. When Denton was located, he appeared defensive but cooperative. He admitted to past disagreements but denied recent contact. Call logs confirmed no exchanges in the last month. His alibi placed him in Portland, supported by toll camera footage time-stamped at 1:47 a.m. That effectively ruled him out. The husband's alibi remained unstable, but not disproved. The investigation, once seemingly straightforward, began to stall. The lead detective requested an internal audit of scene handling, a procedural safeguard rarely applied in domestic cases. The audit report returned one anomaly: an unregistered data access to the evidence database on the morning of January 12th, 2 days after the crime. The credentials belonged to a patrol officer from the night shift, name partially redacted in the early drafts. That same officer's presence was recorded in several other initial response calls across the district, each involving early arrival times and later irregularities in report sequencing. Still, no one inside the department spoke the connection aloud. The investigation's hierarchy discouraged speculation about internal faults. Instead, the focus returned to reconciling timeline gaps. At this stage, a technical memo from the forensics lab introduced a subtle contradiction. The time displayed on the victim's wall clock had not stopped due to mechanical impact, but had been manually adjusted backward. The clock mechanism bore no fracture. Its battery remained functional. The pointer displacement occurred through deliberate repositioning, a small but telling act. The moment of death was not 2:14. Someone had set the time to make it appear that way. When the coroner's official report was finalized, it noted an estimated death window between 2:12 and 2:20 a.m., contradicting the initial assumption of precision. The difference forced a reassessment of the recorded dispatch call, the arrival time, and the forensic synchronization. All three aligned unnaturally at 2:14, a calibration too symmetrical to be chance. Lieutenant Moore revisited the raw radio logs. He requested the transmission history from all patrol units in the area that night. The dataset returned standard check-ins, with one deviation: a brief, undocumented signal sent at 2:09 a.m. on Channel 3A, the encrypted internal line used by active patrols. The source unit ID matched the sector responding to Cedar Avenue. The message was short: "Scene clear." But at 2:09, the scene did not yet exist. The discrepancy once again was filed without escalation. No evidence of malice, just another anomaly among dozens. The pattern, however, was starting to form. One of control, foresight, and methodical misdirection. Every inconsistency, every missing minute, appeared to anticipate scrutiny. It was not incompetence, it was design. By the third week, the husband's charges remained pending review. The media had lost interest. Internally, Moore submitted a memo to the chief of detectives recommending reassignment of the case due to persistent procedural interference. No details were elaborated. The request was denied. Outside official channels, the lab analyst, Miles Rivera, noticed something during his independent audit. The access log from the evidence database that morning included a file labeled 47B CAM zip. Its checksum did not match the original upload hash. The file had been replaced, not deleted. He marked it for verification, unaware of what it implied. Within hours, the replacement was overwritten by a scheduled system backup. The original was gone. The record now showed only what someone intended it to show. Nothing more, nothing less. The weeks following the loss of the 47B CAM zip file created a subtle fracture within the investigative team. Officially, the disappearance was attributed to a technical synchronization fault during the automated backup. Unofficially, several analysts found the checksum mismatch too specific to be accidental. Data corruption tends to be random. This one was exact. The overwritten file had replaced itself with a clone. Same name, same size, identical timestamp. Only the content was different. Lieutenant Moore requested a full restoration from the city's IT division. The response came back 3 days later. No previous version existed in the archive. The earliest record already contained the corrupted file. The backup that should have preserved the original footage had been executed manually, not automatically. The technician listed for that period was Officer Mark Hanley, assigned as scene liaison for digital evidence. The connection was procedural, not suspicious, at least then. Rivera noted in his personal log, "Backup metadata altered manually. Admin privileges used." That entry was never uploaded to the department database. In parallel, the lab processed the physical evidence: glove residue, carpet fibers, and blood traces. The glove material matched standard issue police nitrile, distributed in bulk across departments. The supply logs were cross-checked. No shortages, no unreported removals. The residue could have come from any responder. The line between contamination and concealment blurred. Every item that could have clarified the sequence was touched by procedure, the safest way to erase intent. Attention returned to the husband. His counsel demanded transparency about the timeline inconsistencies. Prosecutors hesitated, citing ongoing analysis. Publicly, the case remained unsolved but stable. Internally, fractures widened. Rivera's unease grew when he discovered that his system credentials had been used for secondary data exports at 03:12 a.m., the same timestamp flagged weeks earlier. The extracted files included call logs and scene photos. None bore his signature. When he attempted to trace the access source, the network showed a loopback address, meaning the download had originated from a device inside the department, possibly his own workstation during idle hours. The pattern repeated with unsettling precision. Official tasks completed just beyond accountability. Moore, though cautious, began to question the reliability of early scene documentation. He revisited the photographs attached to the initial report and noticed a subtle inconsistency. The doorframe's fingerprint dusting pattern differed between two sets taken within an hour of each other. In the earlier photo, a faint partial print was visible. In the later one, it was gone. The angle, lighting, and orientation matched, meaning the mark had been wiped or retouched after the initial capture. A second lab inspection found microfibers of paper tissue embedded in the area where the print once appeared. No authorized personnel had reason to touch that surface after documentation. A removed print, small, deliberate, and entirely unnecessary unless it belonged to someone who shouldn't have been there. Moore filed a confidential memorandum requesting internal review. The request was acknowledged but not processed. Bureaucracy absorbed the anomaly. Meanwhile, the psychological portrait of the victim gained complexity. Emails from weeks prior showed correspondence with someone listed only as MH in her contact folder. The messages alternated between formal and intimate tones, at times referencing department regulations, and later shifting to personal language. "You said it would stop." Analysts initially believed the sender to be a member of her workplace's design firm. When background searches yielded nothing, the lead shifted back to possible law enforcement contact. MH, two letters that fit multiple names but resonated uncomfortably close to one already in the report. To verify, Moore ordered a metadata extraction from Laura's recovered phone. The last Bluetooth pairing registered was with a nearby device identified as TAC Unit 14. The code referred to a police communication tablet assigned to a single patrol car, Unit 14, logged to Officer Hanley. The record, though cryptic, placed that device within 3 meters of the victim's phone approximately 20 minutes before the call to dispatch. When confronted with this discovery, Hanley was not yet under suspicion. Moore approached him under the guise of procedural clarification. Hanley explained that his unit frequently operated in the area and that the Bluetooth proximity likely occurred during an unrelated traffic stop earlier that evening. His tone remained measured, his expression calm. His response was both plausible and rehearsed. The lieutenant's notes from that conversation contain a single line: "Composure inconsistent with context." The first shadow of doubt entered the investigation. Quiet, unspoken, but recorded. That same afternoon, Rivera noticed another anomaly. The evidence catalog listed the victim's wristwatch among personal effects. The time displayed on the watch face matched the wall clock exactly: 2:14. However, the internal mechanism, when tested, had stopped due to battery removal, not impact. Someone had opened the watch and removed the cell manually. Rivera, meticulous by nature, photographed the component tray. The screwdriver marks around the edge suggested improper handling, not by a technician, but by someone attempting to freeze the display intentionally. He logged the finding and submitted it as addendum to the main report. Within 24 hours, the document vanished from the shared system. A replacement entry appeared in its place, identical except for the omission of the battery detail. Rivera attempted to retrieve the earlier draft through cached storage. Access denied. Permissions revoked. He visited Moore's office late that evening, carrying printouts. The lieutenant listened without interruption, eyes fixed on the evidence tag numbers. When Rivera finished, Moore asked only one question: "Who handled that watch first?" Rivera checked the chain of custody. The first signature belonged to Hanley, listed as scene liaison, responsible for item transfer from the apartment to evidence intake. Standard protocol. Unremarkable. And yet everything that disappeared, everything that failed, had passed briefly through the same pair of hands. By the end of that week, Moore began cross-referencing all cases logged under Hanley's patrol coverage over the past year. A pattern emerged: early arrival times, ambiguous radio calls, and minor database inconsistencies. Never enough to trigger review, always sufficient to alter sequence. Most were low-level incidents, resolved without escalation. Case 47B was the first involving homicide. When Moore compiled the data, he faced a procedural wall. Internal Affairs could not initiate inquiry without formal cause. What he had were correlations, not evidence. But the symmetry was undeniable. He wrote in his notebook, "The first responder is always first for a reason." The next morning, his access credentials to the central database were suspended for maintenance. The suspension of Lieutenant Moore's credentials was justified as a routine data integrity review, though no such audits had been scheduled for that quarter. Access to the central database remained restricted for 48 hours. When his credentials were restored, his private notes folder, labeled C47B KORR, had been deleted. The recovery logs showed an administrative override executed from the same workstation where the 47B backup had originated. No explanation was offered. The department issued a neutral memorandum citing data consolidation under digital evidence restructuring. It sounded procedural, harmless, bureaucratically airtight. But inside the homicide division, the silence became heavier. Files were being rewritten, and nobody wanted to admit who was holding the pen. Moore did what most investigators in compromised systems do. He began keeping a parallel record, off-network, handwritten. The margins of his legal pad carried numbers, notations, and clock references. He mapped a pattern of digital interference against patrol logs. The overlay was precise. Every data anomaly corresponded to moments when Officer Hanley's unit ID appeared near the central terminal. Still, suspicion is not proof. Procedure demands sequence, not instinct. Meanwhile, the department's public narrative remained static. The husband, Eric McKenna, was still the only named person of interest. A preliminary warrant for his electronic devices was granted. Digital forensics retrieved fragments of deleted messages, fragments that, curiously, mirrored phrases already present in the case summary. Words like stop, enough, and done. The repetition suggested insertion rather than coincidence. Analysts began to question whether those fragments had been uploaded or synthesized. The husband's guilt had become a template rather than a hypothesis. Forensic examiner Rivera persisted in his private audit. Using off-site backups, he compared system logs from January 11th, the night of the crime, to those from other unrelated incidents. He found the same loopback access patterns in 3 other homicide responses. All occurred within Hanley's patrol jurisdiction. Each showed a manual overwrite of camera data between 3:00 and 3:20 a.m. He printed the logs, 3 pages per case, and stored them in a sealed envelope labeled C47B Core 02. Way! He placed the envelope in his locker. At 7:40 the next morning, the locker had been emptied. No forced entry. The surveillance cameras covering that section of the building were undergoing scheduled maintenance, a coincidence that appeared in the weekly bulletin posted 1 day prior. The bulletin was approved by Hanley. Every record that hinted at internal interference vanished the same way, politely, efficiently, without visible intrusion. Moore attempted to rebuild trust through procedure. He filed an official inquiry for cross-verification of first responder arrival times. The response included a newly issued log, cleaner, reformatted, stripped of peripheral radio chatter. It listed the first unit arrival as 2:18, consistent with dispatch. There was no trace of the earlier discrepancy, but when Moore reviewed his handwritten notes, he found a marginal annotation. Radio burst 209, channel 3A. The entry, now absent from the digital file, was preserved only on paper. It was enough to seed doubt, not in the case itself, but in the infrastructure built to investigate it. In an act both procedural and desperate, Moore ordered a full forensic audit of radio channel recordings for the entire night. The request was routed through Communications Division. The response came back partial. The archive from Channel 3A between 2:05 and 2:12 a.m. had been purged automatically due to signal degradation. The technician's signature confirming deletion belonged once again to Hanley. When confronted, Hanley maintained composure. His explanation was routine, a corrupted data segment flagged for removal during post-shift cleanup. His tone was steady, devoid of defensiveness. Moore described his demeanor later as mechanical calm. Calm is often the cleanest camouflage. That evening, Moore stayed late at headquarters reviewing analog logs, handwritten patrol sheets submitted by officers at the end of their shifts. Most entries were unremarkable: speeding citations, welfare checks, noise complaints. But one line on Hanley's sheet stood out. For the time interval 1:50 to 2:20 a.m., under activity, he had written a single word: observation. No location, no code, no context. By regulation, patrol logs required event codes or street names. The term observation was uncommon, vague, almost defensive. Moore flagged it. At 9:12 p.m., as he left the office, he received a text from an unlisted number. "Stop running duplicate copies." The message deleted itself within 30 seconds. Phone records showed no incoming SMS during that window. He didn't go home. Instead, he drove to the city records facility, retrieved analog copies of early dispatch logs, and confirmed his memory. The first recorded radio contact from the responding unit indeed listed a preliminary, scene-secure transmission at 2:09 a.m. before the 2:11 emergency call. That small fragment, one phrase out of hundreds, confirmed what intuition had been whispering. The scene had been staged, not discovered. Someone was there before the crime was reported, controlling the narrative before anyone else knew there was one. Back at headquarters, Rivera attempted to re-enter the evidence system through a mirror server. He used a maintenance credential to bypass recent restrictions. Deep within the archive, he located partial metadata referencing a deleted external drive labeled TAS-14EXT. It contained synchronized GPS coordinates for patrol vehicles, data never included in the official case log. He extracted one record, 47B Cedar Avenue, time-stamped 2:06 a.m. Hanley's unit. He froze, verifying twice. The file wasn't false, it was residual, a fragment of the system that had failed to erase itself completely. He saved it onto an encrypted flash drive, placed it inside a plain envelope, and slid it beneath Moore's office door before leaving for the night. When Moore arrived the next morning, the envelope was gone. The janitorial logs showed no entries between midnight and 6. The cleaning contractor reported the door had been already ajar. The office security camera pointed at the hallway had experienced a power interruption at 2:08 a.m. The same hour, the same precision, the same silence. By then, even procedure could no longer mask design. Moore compiled an internal memorandum addressed to the chief of detectives. It contained no accusation, only data, GPS inconsistencies, digital overwrite patterns, and the 2:09 radio transmission. He sent it through encrypted internal mail, marked urgent. 2 hours later, his account was locked. By early February, Moore's account remained locked, and no formal explanation reached his desk. Access restrictions within the department had become selective, subtle boundaries disguised as routine maintenance. His colleagues avoided questions. Files he once opened freely now produced error codes or redacted placeholders. Yet inside his drawer, a single hard copy survived. The handwritten reconstruction of timestamps, circled in pencil, 2:06, 2:09, 2:11, 2:14. The progression no longer resembled chance, it formed intent. Without network access, Moore began collecting evidence the only safe way left, on paper. Patrol rosters, analog radio sheets, vehicle fuel logs, printed entry reports. Patterns emerged even without digital confirmation. Unit 14, assigned to Hanley, appeared repeatedly in proximity to incidents logged minutes before public calls were received. Always early, always first. Proximity, not coincidence, had become the hidden constant. Meanwhile, Rivera, the forensic analyst, continued his silent audit. He no longer trusted internal systems. Instead, he archived fragments on encrypted drives hidden among calibration files. During a late shift, he discovered a residual checksum from the erased GPS data. Its numerical signature matched a previous case, one that had ended in accidental death 6 months earlier, also under Hanley's patrol. No record of that checksum should have existed. Rivera printed the value on paper and destroyed the original file. Outside headquarters, Tacoma moved under gray skies and steady drizzle. Streets washed clean each night, leaving few traces, an apt mirror for the investigation itself. Inside, tension thickened without open conflict. Moore's subordinates complied with orders but withheld updates, unsure which directives remained valid. The chain of command had become porous. An internal memorandum announced new oversight from the district commander. Officially, it aimed to restructure investigative flow. Unofficially, it diluted Moore's authority. Case 47B was reassigned to a review board chaired by administrative officers unfamiliar with fieldwork. Their conclusions leaned on statistical probability. 92% of similar domestic cases involved the spouse. The report's language hardened. The suspect profile narrowed again toward Eric McKenna. Moore read the summary and marked a single sentence with his pen. All anomalies attributable to procedural variance. Then he drew a line through it. He met Rivera outside protocol, in the basement corridor where evidence transports passed between divisions. Rivera handed him a folded sheet, coordinates, extracted from backup fragments before deletion. The numbers corresponded to Cedar Avenue, time-stamped 2:06 a.m. No origin header remained, only raw data. Moore memorized the figures and tore the paper in half. They spoke little. Surveillance microphones recorded nothing. Interference from refrigeration units drowned their voices. Truth survived now only as fragments carried by two men who could not discuss them aloud. Back at the lab, Rivera's terminal flickered with an error loop. His clearance was suspended, pending inquiry into unauthorized data replication. He left the building without contest. No formal termination notice followed, but his access badge stopped working the next day. Moore proceeded alone. He revisited the physical evidence, objects too simple to erase. The watch, the clock, the unsent message, beginning with M. He ordered new photographs under a secondary evidence code, labeling them as cross-training material to bypass review. During re-examination, a faint trace beneath the victim's fingernail went unnoted in prior analysis. Synthetic fiber consistent with uniform undershirts issued to patrol units. The report he filed for this finding was concise, technical, and unsigned. By mid-month, Hanley's demeanor remained flawless. He attended briefings, offered assistance, volunteered for overtime. His reports were punctual, grammatically clean, devoid of personality. Moore observed from distance, registering the controlled rhythm of his behavior. Not arrogance, discipline, the kind developed by someone who learned to predict scrutiny. A departmental briefing held on February 18th closed with administrative congratulations for progress toward resolution. Statistics, not evidence, dictated the optimism. Hanley received acknowledgement for early response efficiency. The applause sounded hollow inside concrete walls. After the meeting, Moore stood alone near the bulletin board where case charts hung. Photos of the scene, the victim, and evidence diagrams formed a grid of sterile order. He stepped closer, studying one frame, the original image of the doorway, time-stamped 2:22 a.m. In the reflective surface of the entry mirror, blurred by depth of field, a shape appeared. Not distinct enough to identify, yet the silhouette carried a shoulder patch pattern only patrol uniforms bore. The discovery wasn't dramatic, only coldly consistent. Another quiet proof buried in pixels no one had examined. He requested an enhancement under the pretext of instructional material. The image, processed through low-light algorithms, revealed a partial reflection of an arm reaching toward the wall clock. Someone had adjusted the time while the body was still cooling. Moore saved the image to a portable drive and labeled it Archive Temp. He made no duplicate. Experience had taught him duplication attracted deletion. That night his apartment phone rang once. No voice, only silence and faint static. Caller ID displayed a departmental prefix. He unplugged the receiver and wrote in his notebook, "Contact initiated. Containment phase begins." Sleep evaded him. The logical structure of the crime had become an equation too symmetrical to sustain coincidence. Access before report. Arrival before call. Scene secure before discovery. Every event mirrored intention, each correction hiding the next. The following morning, a department-wide circular announced Moore's temporary reassignment to administrative review, pending evaluation of field conduct. The memo carried no accusation, only procedural language, precisely the sort he once used to close others' cases. He folded the paper once, slid it into his notebook beside the coordinates, and walked out of the office without signing acknowledgement. Outside, drizzle resumed. Fine, steady, unending. He looked toward Cedar Avenue's direction, the origin point of every unanswered question. If patterns hold, he thought, silence would not. Somewhere inside the system, a man who mastered procedure was losing control of it. Moore's reassignment confined him to a temporary desk near archives. Officially administrative duty, practically exile. Case 47B now progressed without him, handled by officers who treated inconsistencies as clerical noise. Yet reports still crossed his desk for review, and small details kept surfacing: timestamps, signatures, quiet fingerprints of design. A supplemental lab note mentioned the recovered wall clock. According to the technician, smudges near its frame matched glove texture from standard patrol kits. The entry ended with a line crossed in ink. Handled post-mortem, possibly by responder. The correction beside it read, "Contamination during transport." Erasure had learned to disguise itself as procedure. Moore began writing again, short observations in pencil. Fabric under nail, patrol issue. Watch battery removed manually. Each note connected silently to one name. Hanley maintained routine perfection. Early arrivals, prompt paperwork, steady composure. The department saw discipline. Moore saw control. He no longer needed digital evidence. Every pattern followed muscle memory. 2 days later, Rivera appeared at Moore's apartment door. He looked exhausted, unshaven, carrying only an envelope. Inside, a single photo from the mirror reflection. Cropped, higher resolution, contrast adjusted. It showed a uniform sleeve with a partial badge number. 14. Nothing more. Rivera said quietly, "They'll close it next week." Then he left. Moore studied the image until dawn. The digits glimmered faintly through static blur, enough to confirm what every erased file had already implied. The case hadn't been mishandled, it had been directed. Before the call, before the report, there was someone already waiting inside 47B Cedar Avenue. He folded the photo once and placed it with his notebook, ready for the next step, documenting a truth the system refused to see. Moore returned to headquarters under pretense of clearing paperwork. The building felt altered, quiet, efficient, indifferent. He carried Rivera's photograph folded within his case file, pretending it was routine correspondence. Surveillance lenses followed him through corridors that once belonged to him. At his old office door, a new nameplate hung where his used to be. Behind it, Hanley stood, speaking with a junior investigator. Polite smiles, measured tones, nothing out of order. When Hanley noticed him, he nodded, professional and distant. Moore nodded back. No words. Inside the records room, he retrieved old dispatch binders, paper backups from before the department digitized its logs. Between pages of faded carbon paper, he found what he expected: a handwritten notation from the night of the crime. Under "Initial Call," the operator had scribbled "Male voice, calm," said "Scene clear," cut before name. The time beside it, 2:09 a.m. The operator's initials matched the archived shift schedule. The notation proved the impossible: confirmation of an on-site voice before discovery. Moore photographed it quickly, slipping the phone back into his pocket. Truth had become portable. Something carried, not filed. That afternoon he located Rivera near the municipal pier, where the city's light met the river fog. The analyst looked thinner, tense, carrying the exhaustion of quiet paranoia. "I found something else," Rivera said, handing over a memory card sealed in a plastic sleeve. GPS telemetry from unit maintenance. They never touched this system. Moore returned home before opening it. The files were crude, hexadecimal data from vehicle diagnostics. But buried inside, one readable line stood out. TAC 14, 02, 06, 43, Cedar Ave. The coordinates matched the victim's address, 6 minutes before dispatch received the first call. He sat still, letting the data settle. Facts no longer needed interpretation, only courage. Next morning, Moore arrived at precinct early. The administrative board met in conference room 3A, finalizing closure recommendations. He requested 10 minutes, invoking procedural right as lead investigator of record. Permission granted. When he entered, eyes followed him with polite caution. He placed 3 printed photos on the table. The watch face stopped at 2:14, the mirror reflection showing 14, and the log entry marked 2:09. No commentary, only sequence. "This case has been solved," Moore said, voice even. "Just not officially." One supervisor shifted uneasily. Another glanced toward Hanley, seated near the end of the table. Hanley's expression held no reaction. Calm, steady, unreadable. "You're suggesting contamination led to misinterpretation," he said finally. His tone was factual, not defensive. Moore replied, "Contamination requires chance. This was symmetry." The room tightened. Procedure met implication, and implication had no form. The meeting ended without decision. Official minutes recorded only that unverified claims were raised. But after that morning, whispers spread quietly through corridors about the early arrival, the vanished backups, the erased checksums. Nothing documented, yet nothing entirely forgotten. That night, Moore received another envelope beneath his apartment door. No return name, no note. Inside, a single evidence tag cut from standard yellow tape, handwritten initials MH in blue ink. He turned it over. Ink smudged, faint trace of glove powder. The system had begun to answer him, one warning at a time. He placed the tag beside Rivera's photo and wrote one final line in his notebook. Pattern confirmed. Truth now dangerous. Rain pressed against the windows the next morning, a low hiss that blended with the city's hum. Moore sat at his kitchen table staring at the evidence tag marked MH. The initials could have belonged to anyone, but he recognized the handwriting, block letters with flattened serifs, identical to Hanley's incident reports. The tag was a message, not evidence. A reminder that someone still controlled the perimeter. He left the apartment before sunrise, avoiding his car, walking 3 miles through narrow streets until the precinct came into view. Inside, The air carried the faint smell of toner and disinfectant. Rivera waited by the stairwell, eyes hollow from lack of sleep. "They called me back in," he whispered. "Said they're reopening the forensics audit, but my badge doesn't scan past the first floor." Moore nodded. "Keep it that way." In the lab, the watch, the clock, and the clothing samples had already been boxed for transfer to evidence disposal. He signed them out under a training requisition and carried them into an unused conference room. Under the fluorescent light, details emerged that earlier reports had overlooked. Residue of adhesive beneath the clock battery panel, a fingerprint smeared but visible under oblique illumination. He lifted it using improvised powder and tape, then compared the ridge pattern to archived samples in his notebook. It matched the partial print once removed from the door frame. The erased print and the adjusted clock belonged to the same hand. He documented the finding manually, folding each page into his jacket pocket. The walls seemed to hum, ventilation maybe, or the weight of silence. At noon, the review board announced that Case 47B would close within 48 hours. Official cause: domestic dispute escalating to fatal injury. Evidence deemed inconclusive for prosecution. Moore's name was absent from the closing draft. He returned to his desk and began compiling a final dossier, not for the department, but for the record that would remain after him. Each page cross-referenced time, access, and metadata: 206, 209, 211, 214. One column for actions, another for falsifications. He wrote until the pages blurred, until cause and cover became indistinguishable. Rivera appeared again near closing hour, carrying a sealed drive. "Last copy," he said. "Diagnostics mirror from fleet maintenance. They'll erase it tomorrow." Moore nodded, slipping it into an envelope. "You shouldn't keep it," Rivera warned. "They're watching every terminal." Moore didn't answer. He only said, "Truth exists whether they watch it or not." Outside, thunder cracked, brief, hard, and final. That night, as he filed the envelope into his bag, he noticed a message slipped under his door. "Let it close, Carl. Everyone does." No signature, only the faint indentation of a police emblem pressed into the paper. He tore it in half, quietly. In the distance, sirens echoed somewhere across the industrial district, fading into the rain. For the first time since the beginning, he understood that the case would not end with conviction, but with correction. A system correcting itself to survive. He opened his notebook, added one last entry below the others. If symmetry defines the crime, asymmetry must expose it. Tomorrow he would act on that thought. Moore arrived before dawn, the station lights still dim. A quiet hour when no one guarded the archives, when the building belonged to static and hum. He carried only his notebook and the sealed drive Rivera had given him. The decision was already made. He would document the truth outside the system that had been built to bury it. Inside the evidence wing, security cameras blinked amber, offline for nightly maintenance. He crossed to the auxiliary terminal, one that still accepted portable drives. The screen flickered blue as he inserted the device. File names appeared, rows of numbers and code. One folder contained the fleet telemetry. Another held mirror copies of erased logs, each tagged with GPS markers. At the bottom of the list, a single file stood out. 47B ORIG move. He opened it. Grainy footage filled the monitor. The entryway of the apartment, timestamp 02.06/21. The frame shook slightly as if recorded by a chest camera. The door already stood open. A woman's shadow crossed the floor, followed by another figure stepping into view, uniformed. He froze the frame. The patch on the arm bore the number 14. A second later, a hand reached toward the wall clock and adjusted the minute hand backward. Then the feed cut to static. The unedited recording had survived, hidden in plain sight. Moore saved still frames to a separate folder, then disconnected the drive. Every light in the hallway flickered back on. Maintenance over. He pocketed the evidence and exited through the rear stairwell. Outside, dawn thinned the fog. He walked several blocks to a small cafe, its windows clouded with condensation. Rivera waited in a corner booth, nervous eyes scanning the door. Moore placed the drive on the table. "It's enough," he said. Rivera hesitated. "If you turn that in, it won't survive 12 hours. "I'm not turning it in," Moore replied. "I'm recording it elsewhere." He explained the plan. Forward copies to independent archives, time-stamped and notarized, ensuring a record beyond departmental reach. It wouldn't convict, but it would outlast erasure. Rivera nodded slowly, understanding the cost. By noon, they split. Different exits, no communication after. Back at headquarters, Hanley reviewed the closure memo with the review board. His voice was calm, procedural. "All forensic anomalies accounted for," he said, "and the narrative consistent with domestic violence." He signed the final page. Ink barely dry, his radio buzzed. Dispatch requesting his presence at a minor traffic collision. Routine. He left without delay. In Moore's temporary office, the air felt heavy. He sat behind the desk, watching rain slide down the glass, the sealed envelope beside his hand. Inside it, the drive now held both the video and his final written statement. A record of symmetry undone. He looked once toward the clock on the wall. 2:14 p.m. The same number repeated, unintentional or not. He closed the notebook, pressed the envelope beneath it, and exhaled. Patterns collapse quietly when they finally meet their mirror. Outside, sirens approached from the south, growing louder. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang. He didn't answer. When officers entered minutes later, they found his desk empty, chair pushed neatly under. Only the envelope remained, addressed in precise handwriting. For the record. The official narrative of Case 47B closed at 17 Hook hours, marked complete and archived under Domestic Fatality, Resolved. The final summary listed no suspects, no internal discrepancies, no ongoing review. Paperwork aligned flawlessly, signatures were uniform. Every element fit its procedural frame. Yet beneath that perfection, fragments began to move. Slow, silent, irreversible. 3 days later, a journalist from the Tacoma Ledger received a plain envelope with no return address. Inside, a single flash drive and a printed note. Sequence, not chance. CM. The drive contained 3 files. A copy of the unedited 47B entry footage, the mirror reflection still frame, and Moore's chronological index of data anomalies. Each line was dated, cross-referenced, sourced. It lacked narrative, emotion, accusation. Only the mechanical truth of order dismantled. Truth delivered like evidence. Cold, precise, and impossible to refute. Within hours, Internal Affairs reopened the file. Quietly, without press release. The review board reconvened, this time excluding field officers. The footage's metadata was verified by 2 independent analysts. Timestamp 02.0621. GPS coordinate 47B Cedar Avenue. Unit ID TAC-14. Confirmation left no interpretive room. Hanley was brought in for questioning under administrative pretext. He entered the room without hesitation, uniform pressed, eyes steady. Investigators presented the still frame. He studied it, expression unchanged. "Could be anyone," he said. "Image quality is poor." The lead auditor pointed to the patch number. "It's yours." Silence extended for 6 measured seconds. Hanley's gaze remained fixed on the photograph. Then, almost mechanically, he exhaled and asked for water. While protocol dictated suspension, no formal arrest followed that night. Bureaucracy resisted exposure. Systems protect themselves. Yet containment had failed. Word spread through quiet channels, first inside the precinct, then outward through legal intermediaries. The footage reached digital repositories before deletion orders could be executed. Copies appeared in independent archives, mirrored across multiple servers, time-stamped beyond reversal. Once recorded, a pattern cannot be unlearned. In the following weeks, internal reviews expanded beyond 47B. Other incidents resurfaced: minor calls, unsolved assaults, discrepancies measured in minutes. Each one intersected Hanley's patrol logs. His reputation for precision inverted, becoming evidence of control. The same order that had shielded him now exposed the design beneath it. He resigned before the first subpoena. The resignation letter was one sentence: "I acted as trained." Moore's name remained absent from official statements. His whereabouts were never formally recorded after the day he left the envelope on his desk. Colleagues assumed transfer, others, resignation. His apartment emptied within a week. Only the notebook remained, recovered months later in a sealed box from storage. Inside, meticulous handwriting filled the margins: times, initials, equations, fragments of thought reduced to method. One line repeated across several pages, written in pencil: "Justice requires memory to survive procedure." Rivera, reinstated quietly under a new division, provided final verification of the data chain. During testimony, he described the recovered evidence without emphasis. "Everything was technically correct," he said, "just not true." The department released a brief statement acknowledging record-keeping anomalies. No mention of Hanley or Moore or the sequence that bound them. Official memory settled back into calm uniformity, the kind that resists scrutiny through sheer familiarity. Yet outside institutional walls, the footage persisted. Analysts dissected frames, counting seconds between motion and silence. They saw no rage, no hesitation, only routine. A man entering, adjusting a clock, arranging time itself before stepping back into darkness. The crime was not passion, but structure. Precision, weaponized against truth. Months later, in an ethics seminar for new recruits, an instructor displayed a still from the case. Not for identification, but for lesson. "Every investigation," he said, "depends on chronology. When time is manipulated, justice dissolves." No one mentioned names. No one needed to. The final archived version of the 47B report remains accessible through departmental request, redacted for public viewing. Page 12 carries a notation added by an unknown hand in faint graphite: "Sequence restored." And below it, almost invisible under smudged erasure: "Clock stopped at 2:14, restarted at 2:16. The space between those minutes, two quiet missing beats, holds everything that happened, everything hidden, everything proved. Truth survived not because it was protected, but because it was written precisely enough to resist deletion. Next case dismantles another perfect crime. Don't miss it.